Good day everyone. So the candidates tournament is a great chance for us to watch the games of our favorite players and learn from them. On the first round, Aronian played white against Carlsen. Let's see how it went. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, avoiding the Imzo Indian, bishop b4, the Bogo Indian, bishop d2, takes, and d5. Already I think that this opening is quite drawish. Black has played well, white has played well. Nothing major has happened here. Knight c3, castle e3, and now it's like a queen's gambit declined. There's this structure here, and white already has used his c-pawn, which is wise, before he uses this knight, and black is going to do the same. He's going to play his knight to d7 so he can play c5 pretty soon. Queen e7. It's a relatively safe file for the queen, and it's not blocking the d7 square, which could be used by the pieces. Rook c1, a logical move in these types of positions because the c file is going to be semi-open most likely. Rook d8 by black. That's also quite logical. Black can take here, and then the d file becomes semi-open, plus it's on the same file as white's queen. Queen c2 here, so now the queen is a little bit safer. Black played a6, preparing the possible b5 at some point, and also the bishop can be developed to b7 this way, acting on the long diagonal. And also now this knight can't jump to b5, so it's a multi-purpose move. It's a good move for black in many openings, also the Sicilian. A3 here by white. So I think Aronian many times just wants to play a solid structure and doesn't try to achieve anything too ambitious in his games. I mean, especially in this tournament where everyone is extremely careful, and I think Carlsen also is very careful in this tournament, because even one loss could mean, losing the contender status after this tournament. So every half point is very important. So a3 by white. Now knight b d7. These knights are protecting each other nicely. Bishop e2. And now black takes on here because this bishop has to waste another move to recapture here. So black did well to kind of save this move until this moment. So now white has to waste a tempo recapturing on c4. Okay, right after white takes on c4, black plays c5, which I think is a nice idea, just trying to stir things up a bit, because white has not castled yet. So black tries to somehow get some complications. It's well protected. Black is threatening to maybe give an isolated pawn to white, or just if white takes, to open up the d file or something, and this diagonal could be useful as well. Let's see if black can get some action from this. What white plays here is bishop back to e2. I think it's a quite sensible move. White just ignores this tension here. He puts the bishop back to e2 where it protects his knight, which might come under pressure from this diagonal. Also, black is most likely to develop his a-rook to the c-file, where it would put pressure on all of these pieces. So at least now it's not unprotected. Here, perhaps c takes d4 was best, but black played b5. Gaining more space. Look at these pawns here. Black is definitely playing as aggressively as you can play, considering white's play. Here, white took on c5, and queen took on c5. Why doesn't knight take on c5? Because there is possibility of knight takes b5, after which queen takes c5. Okay, so I didn't see that one. And here black can play b4 if he wants to. If white takes, then rook a1 is devastating for white, so that's why white would rather castle, and now black does get the pawn back, and it's quite drawish. So I think it's a nice little tactic there, but black didn't want to go for that. Black wants something more. So queen takes c5. Now b4 by white. Look at this symmetrical pawn structure. You can already tell from here that it's gonna be really drawish. I mean, even here the pawn structure is symmetrical, so I think Aronian just wants to say, you know, I'm playing the white pieces, I can get a draw anytime I want, there's nothing you can do about that, and at this level that's how it usually is. So queen e7, castle, bishop b7. Both sides are fully developed. The only pieces not developed are these rooks, but it doesn't matter so much. They're gonna go to the c and d files probably soon anyway. Here white played a4. Let's see what the computer thinks about it. It's a fine move. Nothing wrong about that. Here black took on a queen took on b4. Another possibility would have been a5. I think this is really interesting. Let's explore this a little bit, because I'm sure this came to Carlsen's mind. Here white has several options. Knight takes b5, b takes a5, and yeah, looks like those are the best. Let's look at knight takes d5. Here maybe 8 takes b4, bishop e4, rook d5, I mean knight d5, and black has a slight advantage. Let's see what happens if b takes a5 instead. Now black can play b4, and rook takes a5, and black also has a slight advantage here. So a5 would have been a nice choice for black here. It's really not a pleasant move for a human to play, because there's so much tension going on between these pawns and everything. So it's really difficult to calculate, and you know, it could go either way. So I don't think he wanted to go to those complications. So queen takes b4. Now a takes b5, a takes b5, and now white played queen b1, and the queens got exchanged. Now bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and rook a to b1. And now white regains that pawn finally, and the material is even. White has a bishop, but it doesn't really matter because the pawn structure is so solid for both players. Now black plays knight a5, and white is happy to give that bishop for a knight, and now exchanges. Now black exchanges a pair of rooks. I think black is also happy to get a draw. It's a nice result for black usually. Both kings take some air. G5, G4, King G7, King G2, Rook D7, protecting the second rank. White does the same. This is almost funny. Rook C7, Knight D4, Knight D5, and Rook C2, and the position is completely symmetrical, and they agree to a draw. Hi guys, so in the second game, Carlsen faced Kramnik. Carlsen started with c4, which is not that ambitious if you ask me. Kramnik responded with c5, so the symmetrical English. Maybe he was trying to play passive aggressively or something. Well, playing e4 against Kramnik is difficult unless you play the closed Rui Lopez, but I think that would have been his best shot. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, e6. So now it looks like a Sicilian, except that white has a pawn on c4 as opposed to e4. So I guess it could be good good for white. Bishop f4 here. White could have also gone knight d to b5, eyeing this d6 square. d5 by black, and I think black is equal here. He doesn't have any problems, and well, I still like white a little bit better, but it's not like white has an opening advantage or anything. Bishop f4, bishop e2, takes, and here white is surely gonna take this pawn back, but also he sees this opportunity to exchange knights here, which gives black an isolated pawn, and also he doesn't mind the possible exchange of the queens, which might lead which leads to an endgame, but which might lead to a draw also. Kramnik is one of the few 2800 players, so I guess Magnus thought that if I get a draw against Kramnik as well, I'll be happy, and then I'll try to score wins against the weaker players. So we also see some nice tournament strats here. D takes c4, knight takes c6, queen exchange, b takes c6, and bishop takes c4. Okay, now knight d5, a very nice place for the knight, and hitting white's bishop and also putting pressure on c3, exploiting this pin. So what white does is he just castles, but white could also play moves like bishop e5 maybe, or bishop takes d5, because this bishop is not doing much at the moment, and it's kind of weak against these pawns, I guess. Also he could play king d2, rook d3, adding another supporter to this knight, stuff like that. Okay, but castles, and that gives black a slight advantage. Black should have taken on c3, but I guess Kramnik just thought, you know, let's keep the bishop pair and remove white's bishop pair. And see how kind of useless this bishop is. Yes, black has the bishop pair, but he can't push this pawn, so these light squares are kind of blocked. Maybe he could push c5 so he could get this long diagonal working, but I don't know, would that pawn become a target or something? Let's try c5 right here. Okay, f5 seems to be a nice move right here. Black probably doesn't want to take because then the e file opens, so perhaps black would want to just take here and then finish his development somehow, maybe castle, and now this pawn did not become a target, but white has an advantage. So perhaps c5 is just too passive. Instead black just took on c3 and played king e7, finishing his development. So now this rook can get out and this king is relatively safe in the center. Here white played rook b1, rook d2 was also possible. Black played bishop d7, which does allow rook b7, so perhaps better was rook d8. Rook b7 and now rook h b8, getting this rook out and forcing a rook exchange. Rook fb1 takes, and here white played a5 because otherwise he can't move the rook because this pawn would be hanging. Bishop d3 by white, hitting this pawn, h6. Now h4 by white, setting up this clamp here so black can't play g5 or anything. Black played king d8 here, trying to go this way and get rid of white's rook. Okay, now the rooks are exchanged, and let's look at this endgame. It's a dead draw, really. 2 pawns on the queen side, 4 pawns on the king side. Same colored bishops. Yes, white has a double pawn, but it doesn't matter because black doesn't have any passed pawns, so it really is a draw. Both sides just have to make sure that the opponent has no entry points. Like, white has to make sure that black can't get in from here somehow. Right now all these squares are taken, so black really has no entry points for his king, even on the king side. And white also, it's really difficult to to penetrate. Maybe this would be a possible square to get in, or maybe this, but I think those are easily blocked with the king. So king e2, king c7, king e3, king d6, excuse me, king d4, c5 check. King goes back to e3. I don't know if that was the best square. Obviously, I mean, apparently it was. Let's see what would happen after king c4. Well, the king can't really do anything on the queen side, so I guess all these squares are taken by black pieces. So the king can't get in, and if he wants to get back to the game, he can't go this way. He has to come all the way around if he wants to get like back to the center. So I guess that wouldn't be very wise. So king e3, bishop c6, now controlling even these squares, and just look at this blockade that black has. And also white is controlling all of these squares, so black can't really get in. Now black is hitting white's g pawn, so white plays g3. Now black plays f6, controlling e5 even more. a3 by white. Now this pawn is not a target anymore. e5 by black. White exchanges his double pawn, and now they agree to a draw. If white would play something like f4, then king could just go back to d6 to a dark square, and now there's not much that white can do. For example, g4, bishop d7, king f3, check, maybe bishop e4. Now black doesn't want to exchange bishops, but bishop d5, king e3, and g5 maybe, or bishop e6, f5. Neither side wants to exchange bishops because then the other king would get to the center. Bishop d3, and they're just shuffling. This pawn structure here won't change much. White might play h5 at some point, and these pawns here don't let white's king in, and I mean, and also black's king can't really get in because white bishop can always cover this square, so there are really no entry points. So in the third round, Magnus played against Gelfand with the black pieces. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, white played knight f3, and now Carlsen played d5. He didn't go for bishop b4, which was played against him on the first round. So knight c3, knight b d7, bishop g5, c6, so the semi-Slav. Now Gelfand has played this a lot against Anand during the World Championship match, so let's see what kind of novelties he has. e3 by white, queen a5, a fairly active move, c takes d5, knight takes d5. One of the reasons why black played queen a5 was possibly to be able to capture here with the knight and preserve this pawn structure here. Rook c1, knight takes c3, and now white has this awkward pawn on c3. I don't know why white didn't really take with the rook, because I guess white could just take here or something. Oh no, there's bishop b4, so that's why b takes c3 is pretty much forced. And now black could have taken this pawn if he wanted to, but then perhaps white would get some kind of compensation in development. So perhaps black didn't want to go for that. So bishop a3, now rook c2, now b6, bishop a6, so is black just happy with a draw, or is he relying on the endgame and on the better pawn structure on the queen side? Castles e4 by white, the best move. Now rook f e8, e5, h6, bishop h4, c5. And what is black's idea here? Maybe he's trying to cause a backwards pawn for white on d4. And also if white takes, then he has two isolated pawns, so that would be no good. So, and I don't know if d5 is an option either. So white played knight d2, perhaps wanting to come to b3 or something. So c takes d4, c takes d4, rook a c8, and the knight went to c4, forking these two. Queen b5. Notice how the knight is pinned. f4, rook c7, queen takes a3, but black gets this knight, takes, bishop f2, and you know, I would like to be white in this position. I don't know why. He has an active queen and active rook. He controls the center, but it's actually a little bit better for black. Although black's pieces are only advanced to the 3rd rank, he has this pawn island here, so he can maybe create a passed pawn on the queen side, maybe an outside passed pawn, and his knight can be repositioned to many places, maybe c6, maybe to d5, and this rook can contest the c-file at any point, whereas this bishop is not that good because of these pawns on dark squares. So actually black is a little bit better here. Knight f8, g3, rook c8, takes, d5. Okay, so trying to enhance the scope of this bishop. E takes d5, queen takes d5, g6, and now the knight is nicely positioned on e6, and it can also go to c5 if it wants to. Queen f3, king g7. Now all of these pawns are protected. a3, h5, okay, h4. So now that this side is fixed, black is trying to do something on the queen side. It's still a draw, but let's see how white messes it up. Queen c2, a nice move, trying to perhaps harass this pawn, and also now this bishop is pinned. So queen b7, queen a4, protecting this a pawn, and now the right move probably is queen to e7, staying active and protecting that pawn diagonally. But white played queen f3. It's not bad either. b5, f5, takes, and queen takes a3. Already it's a big advantage for black due to these passed pawns, but it should still be a draw. Queen takes h5, a5, queen g4 check. I think white is just panicking here and can't find a way to fight back. Queen c1, queen e4, still playing well though. b4, bishop e3, and it should still be a draw. Queen c7, check, check. This should still be a draw, but there's 12 moves left and black will win this. So let's see how. Queen e4 check, queen a8 check. White is trying to prove that it's a draw. Now black plays queen d8, offering a queen exchange. Now actually exchanging queens is a big mistake here for white, because the queen is able to give checks, it's able to, you know, stop these pawns, harass black in all kinds of ways. So even though black has these connected passed pawns on the queen side, as long as there's queens on the board, it's a draw. So he should have played queen c6, queen e4, something like that. Okay, but white exchanged queens, and now it's a big advantage for black. Queen f3, king f3, sorry, king e4, and this could still be a draw, but now it's escalating real quickly. If black plays the move knight c6, which he did, it's an excellent move, protecting this pawn, eyeing this pawn, and just bring the knight closer, supporting these pawns, while this king is maybe ready to munch these pawns. So bishop c1, taking a defensive role. This bishop can't be both defensive and aggressive. Well, it's also defensive here, but white is trying to queen this pawn, so I guess protecting this pawn is being an aggressor. So knight a5, bishop d2, but okay, that allows b3, king d3, and it's just getting better and better for black. Even though Gelfand is playing the engine moves, it seems that there is no way out. Nice knight sacrifice there. If king takes, then b2, and that pawn can't be stopped. So it's just it's not a real sacrifice. Bishop c3, a3. Again, the knight can't be taken. g4. And here black could already play knight e3, getting ready to go to c2, I suppose. But black just took it slowly. King h7, there's no rush. g5, king g6, bishop d4, b2, and king has to go to c2. And now, can you see the final move? Black again hangs his knight, places it on pre because it can't be taken. And I guess these moves are called sacrifices, although they're like pseudo sacrifices, but anyway. Knight d2, protecting the b1 square, so now the knight has to be taken, otherwise this guy queens. And well, even if the knight is taken, this guy queens, so it was 0-1 for black. So in round 4, Carlsen played against Grischuk. We have the Spanish, and Carlsen plays d3 to avoid the Berlin defense. Bishop c5, c3, hoping to get d4 in at some point. Black castles, white castles, and d6. h3, preventing bishop g4. a6, harassing white's bishop. Bishop takes c6, b takes c6, rook e1, rook e8. Knight b to d2, d5. I don't know if that was the best move or if black should have played something like bishop e6 or bishop b6. But anyway, because here now after white takes and queen takes, there's knight b3, the best move, and bishop f8 is a good move as well, because this knight was hitting that bishop. And now c4, again the best move. Maybe black was hoping that when white takes on d5, this d3 pawn becomes a target. And yes, black is the only player with a central pawn, but white can play c4, and yes, this d3 pawn is a backward pawn, but the c4 pawn is almost like a central pawn. It controls the d5 square. And now white can also play d4 if he wants to, so this knight is supporting d4 as well as this queen, so it's not really a backward pawn. White played bishop e3 first, developing this bishop and further supporting d4. Perhaps bishop g5 was better. So knight d7, d4, e4. Knight fd2. White could have also just pushed c5. a5 by black. And now white plays a4 because he doesn't want to deal with a4 from black. Queen g6 is suggested here. It would probably be a better square, threatening bishop h3 stuff at some point. Black played f5, and that was clearly not the best. See how this diagonal is open now? So maybe white can take advantage of that. He plays c5 first, opening up this diagonal and hitting the queen. Queen goes to g6 now, but perhaps d5 was better at this point. Knight c4, an excellent square for the knight. So another purpose of c5 move was to vacate the c4 square for the knight. And yes, it can't hop here at the moment, but it's guarding these squares. It's really annoying. Also, it's guarding this e5 square, so this knight has to keep an eye on that e5 square. Knight f6 by black was played, but perhaps better queen f7 or something, just blocking this diagonal, hitting the knight immediately. This doesn't seem to be a good square for the queen, because there's no, there's no bishop h3 stuff, because this pawn is in the way, this knight is in the way, and this knight has to guard the e5 square. So right now this queen isn't doing much on g6. Knight f6 by Grischuk, and now white played bishop f4. Okay, it seems reasonable, but I think knight e5 was best here, definitely. Now that white is able to play it, he should play it straight away. But bishop f4 first, hitting this pawn. Now black played the best move, knight d5, hitting the bishop, protecting the pawn. So did white lose his initiative? Well, some of it, but not entirely. He still has a huge advantage. Queen d2 by white, developing the queen. Black played bishop e6, developing the bishop. And now white took this pawn. It was threatened 3 times, and it was about to fall at some point anyway. I think that's why the evaluation was +1, because that pawn was just gonna fall at some point. See how the b pawn is on the c file now, so it can't protect the a pawn. And these 2 pawns here really make it difficult for black to organize his pieces. They're all on the king side now, or in the center where they should be, but in case he needs something on the queen side, it's really difficult to get through here. So white has some nice prospects on the queen side. Black played rook e to b8, but perhaps better was to exchange this knight for that bishop. Now knight e5, finally. Black played queen f6, but perhaps queen h5 would have been better, or just queen e8, protecting this pawn. So let's see what queen f6 really accomplishes. It isn't doing much here. I don't really know what it's doing. Perhaps Grischuk just wanted to get it, out of the way. And now white played bishop h2, preserving that bishop. It's really annoying on this long diagonal. Whenever this knight moves, this pawn will be hit for another time. If that means something, there could be discoveries. It's a good protector on the dark squares around the king. And now black felt desperate and sacrificed quality. He took an a5, and he does get a pawn for it. So knight and a pawn for a rook, trying to relieve this this tension on the queen side. But things got even worse. Now white has a passed pawn. Well, he did have a passed pawn before as well, but now the other rook is gone, so now there's really no defense on the queen side. Rook a to b1, perhaps queen a6 was better, just hitting that pawn, or queen a8, just hitting that pawn and pinning this bishop. So rook a2, black is trying to stay on the board, keep as many pieces on the board as possible, because he just made a sacrifice. So now white is trying to prove that black's sacrifice was unsound, and white is defending at the moment, whereas black is going all in. He needs to keep attacking in order to prove that sacrifice is winning. So queen a6 here, also rook b8 was a very nice move there. e3 by black, but perhaps knight c3 was better. It doesn't lead to much, but it does enable knight e2 check, perhaps, or rook takes a4. Okay, but e3, just trying to break down this king structure, king position here, but white just takes it, and now black plays the best move, queen g5. So now black has like 3 attacking pieces, and of course white has to take this seriously. White plays rook e2, which is an excellent move, supported by the queen, protecting g2 because black was threatening mate, and now the e3 pawn is however falling. This queen was threatening the pawn at the same time. It was a queen fork. So now white plays knight f3, nice move, harassing the queen, and keeping an eye on the knight and the rook at the same time. Can black still do something? He steps back with the queen to g6, and now white exchanges rooks and plays rook b2, hitting that bishop, still protecting g2. I wonder why no, there was no time to hit on g2, so now white is protecting g2 again, and black played bishop c4. Maybe bishop d5 was better, threatening this knight. Let's see what could have happened after bishop d5. Now black is threatening to take this knight because this pawn is pinned. But here white could just play queen d3, and if bishop takes this knight, then white can just take black's knight, and now there's again 2 attackers on g2 and 2 protectors, so all is well. Queen d3, nice move, just removing one of the attackers on g2. So black played bishop c4 instead, hitting this queen. Queen should have gone to c8 probably, but white wants to play safe. White is not an engine. Queen a5, now bishop d5. Black realized that this is actually a better square, but now queen just plays well to e1, hitting this knight again. Black plays f4, trying to protect that knight, but this bishop just eliminates the protector. Now, as a last trick, black tries to play knight c2, hitting this queen, but queen just goes to f2, hitting the knight, and now black takes this knight. I wonder if there's a trick here. Can this queen just take the knight? Yes, that's also possible, but what Carlsen chose to do was to just take this knight. So now everything's protected, and he doesn't even lose the d pawn. So black resigned here. He's up a pawn, and he has quality. Outside passed pawn. It's over. On the 5th round, Carlsen was defending with the black pieces against the furious Ivanchuk, who has so far put up the most resistance against Carlsen. On the 5th round, however, he didn't succeed in crushing Magnus yet. d4, knight f6, c4, g6. So King's Indian territory, knight c3, except now Magnus chooses the Grunfeld. Bishop f4, bishop g6, knight f3. Now I've noticed that Ivanchuk really knows his openings, and he can get an opening advantage, I think, against anyone. Castle e3, very logical. c5 by black. It's not supported by anything yet, but it's just there to disturb white's pawn structure. White takes on c5, which is probably the right reaction. Queen a5, activating the queen, maybe getting ready to recapture, and at the moment pinning that knight. Rook c1, rook d8, really popular move here. And here some suggestions are maybe maybe b4, maybe queen b3, maybe knight d2, breaking the pin. Let's look at them a little bit, because what Ivanchuk did, I think, was a really nice move. So here, if queen takes, we could have queen d2, for example, and now white can take on d5. So he's back in the game. Maybe bishop g4. And yeah, I don't know if this is the best way to play, but it's pretty equal. Black is a little bit better. So let's look at queen b3 a little bit. Here black can play knight a6. Perhaps here exchange on b5. Knight takes b5 is probably better, because now if knight takes c5, we have knight c7, which is really good for white, because now there's discoveries against the rook and stuff like that. So that's why rather knight e4 here, getting ready to capture that pawn, perhaps with this knight. And you know, stuff like that, addressing this active queen on the queen side. But what Chucky did was queen a4. I think it's a nice move, activating his own queen. Why not? Carlsen took on c5, which was best. Now white played b4. Okay, both of these pawns are protected. I like how he just pushes his pawns. Now there's possibility of b5, maybe c5, maybe c takes d5. It's really difficult to predict what white will do. Black played queen c6, again the best move. And now white avoided the queen exchange. Clearly he was playing for the win, but perhaps best is just to exchange here and continue with knight d4 or something, trying to put pressure on c6. So queen a3, now d takes c4, best move again, and black is temporarily up a pawn. But let's see what black does. Black actually plays b5, now queen b6, best move again. And now white takes on c4. There was no way for black to protect that pawn. If he were to try something like queen e6, protecting it, then it's obstructing this bishop, this pawn, and white can just play knight a4, and now this pawn is most likely going to fall. So white was going to get that pawn back anyway. And yeah, I think white is a lot better here. Like 0.5, like half a pawn. Look at all of his active pieces here. Black wasted time with this queen a5 move, I think. Now that queen got kicked around a little bit. Even this white's pawn is pretty good, I think. It's like a thorn in black's position. It's difficult to get rid of. And black still hasn't developed these pieces. So Yeah, white is definitely better. Let's see what happens next. Bishop e6. That's a reasonable choice often for black if he can't find a better way to develop that bishop. Like, for example, f5 could be met by knight d4, or bishop g4 might be met by knight e5, and it's not really even pinning the knight. So, and on d7 the bishop is obstructing the rook and the knight as well. The knight wants to come to d7 so it gets out of the box. So bishop e6, reasonable move, and yes, it's obstructing the e-pawn at the moment, but if white takes it, then black can recapture with the queen and stuff, so there's no problem. And bishop takes, queen takes, castle. Knight d7, knight g5, so this queen gets kicked around again. Queen f5, perhaps queen c4 was better. Now queen takes e7 was played, and white's advantage is even bigger. It's like 0.8. So of course now white is threatening f7. So how does black address this? Knight h5. Now the queen is protecting f7. And black is also hitting f4 twice. White plays rook fd1, so now if black tries to win a pawn on f4, then white wins this knight on d7. But black takes on f4 anyway first, and now he plays bishop f8, harassing this queen. Queen goes to e4, protecting this f-pawn and suggesting a queen exchange. Queens are exchanged, and now black plays knight b6, the best move, offering rook exchange and developing this knight further. It couldn't go to f6, it couldn't go to e5, it couldn't go to c5, so really the only square, knight b6. White still has a huge advantage. He played g3 just to connect these pawns and also get an escape square for his queen. Rook takes d1, rook takes d1, and let's see if black had something better. Obviously h6 was better, and let's see what would have happened here. Knight has to go back, and now maybe exchange rooks and play maybe f5, even kick this knight. This is very counterintuitive for a human to play this way, to open up their king position, but it's an endgame already, and black could have done that very well. Something like this, and white's advantage is not so big. Okay, let's go back. Instead of h6, just rook takes d1, and now bishop e7. Knight goes back to f3, which was probably unneeded. Rook c8, knight e5, and white's advantage has totally diminished. White should have played knight d4. Okay, but he plays knight e5, and now f5 can be played. Several things can be played here. Black plays rook c7, f6. Now again white has an advantage, so I guess f6 here wasn't good. He plays king f7. White plays h4. Rook c2 by black, the best move, and white has a comfortable half pawn advantage. White played a4. If this knight takes, then there's rook a1 winning this a7 pawn. Let's check it out. Oh, there's rook d7, that's even better. So now this pawn is going to fall. So that's why white plays rook a2. And it's almost drawish. Actually, it's a draw here. Knight c3, rook a3, rook c1. It's even a little bit better for black now. So neither of the players is playing the best moves all the time. Knight takes a6, knight e4. This was a nice choice. Black expected white to exchange knights, but Ivanchuk wants to threaten the possible knight d6 check if this bishop goes to d8, trying to keep this rook out of c7. Because if the rook gets to c7, it's gonna munch some pawns and white is gonna stay active. So now black has a choice. If he plays bishop d7, then knight d6 check and munching this b pawn with the knight. So knight e4, nice choice, avoiding the exchange, still playing for the win. Rook d3 by black here, rook c7, king e6, and now white actually has a big advantage here. Rook b8, but that was a blunder. White should have just exchanged rooks and he might have won the endgame with an extra pawn, but instead he wants to keep the rook in the game. And perhaps if you try to avoid exchanges too much, it might be harmful. Sometimes you just have to exchange, you have to let exchanges happen even if you're trying to win. So rook b8. Now black played rook d8, offering an exchange again, which is fine. See if there was anything better. Perhaps just queen d5 was better, just activating this king. Now black is controlling the center and white's rook is a little bit offside. So rook d8 here, rook goes back to b7, and black again offers repetition, or maybe they're both in time trouble. Anyway, now white exchanges rooks. Black plays knight d4. So white is up a pawn, but black has a bishop, so it's like half a pawn advantage. f5, knight g5, best moves. Bishop takes g5. That knight was too dangerous. It was hitting the h pawn and stuff. So f takes g5, and now white's advantage is a little bit bigger, but I don't know if it's enough to win. Knight c3 here, great move, hitting this pawn. h5, and black takes on h5, which of course allows white to take on f5, but instead white plays slowly king h3, still protecting this pawn and maybe trying to win these pawns with this king. Okay, king d6, king h4, king d5, hitting that knight. So now the knight makes a decision, takes on f5. This knight takes b pawn, king takes the h-pawn, so now white is still up a pawn. So what is black's plan here? Well, this a-pawn is gonna keep white's knight occupied on the queen side, so that's why this king has time to go to f3, stop these pawns, and this knight is gonna sacrifice itself for the g-pawn if needed. So king e4, knight e3, knight d6, activating the knight, king h6, knight f7, check. So black is saying, if you take my h-pawn, I'm gonna take your g-pawn, and that's what white does. King g6, still trying to win. Knight h3, hitting the f-pawn. White doesn't want to give up the f-pawn that easily. King f3, king f5, and now black just takes that f-pawn. Let's see what happens if he tries to get it for free. Well, white has this knight c3, check, and then maybe g4. Perhaps this pawn could escape somehow. So that's why black just plays it safe and plays knight takes f2. So now there's no g4, except now after this knight is forced to take on f2, black doesn't take the knight because that's risky, it just takes this pawn, and now white can't win anymore. Let's see what would have happened after rook takes f2. This is winning for white because now this pawn is faster than black's pawn. So actually what black does here, he doesn't run the pawn up the board because then both players get a queen. He plays king e4 here, restricting black's movement. Black can't catch this pawn anyway, and white is actually gonna eliminate this pawn, so that's why white would be winning this endgame. This king can catch this pawn, but this king can't catch white's pawn. Anyway, Carlsen is good at endgames, so he takes on g3, and they still play on. Ivanchuk wants to play on. I don't know why, but a5, king e4, a4, king d4, a3, knight c3, a2, and I guess now he suggested draw to Carlsen. So round 6, Svidler is playing the white pieces. We get a Spanish. White invites the Berlin defense, but black plays bishop e7, and now it's too late to play the Berlin. b5, d6. So fairly standard Spanish. a4, b4, knight d2, castle, a5. Disconnecting these pawns, but will this pawn become a weakness for white? Bishop e6, knight c4, rook b8, c3, b takes, b takes. So now there's no disconnection between black's pawns, and black has this b file to use. So I think it was smart to put this rook on the b file, because Carlsen knew that white's gonna play c3 at some point, so black can open up the b file. h6, rook e1, queen c8, bishop c2, rook d8. It's more likely that the d file is gonna open up than the e-file, I guess. We will see who is right, whose rook is better, white's rook on the e-file or black's rook on the d-file. Queen e2, bishop f8, knight e3, d5. So I think the idea of playing rook d8 was to support the d5 push. I think black is doing fine here. White can take on d5. So I don't know if d5 was the best idea. Let's see. It's okay. It's probably the best move in this situation. White is still a little bit better, but it's just a normal opening advantage, so nothing special. Both sides have played well. Knight takes d5, rook takes d5, working as a defense piece and also attacking piece. h3, bishop f5, repositioning this bishop. It was really doing nothing on e6, and it wants to exchange itself for this strong light square bishop of white's, which is usually giving headache to black in the Spanish game. Rook d1, queen e6. Now that this rook went to the d-file, it's safe for the queen to go to the e-file, and I think this rook realized that the d-file is more prosperous. Bishop b1. So white is giving up this a-pawn, but he wants more active game, like maybe play bishop here or something. So he didn't want to play passively. But now queen d7. Black doesn't even want the pawn. He wants something more, probably. Maybe queen f6 was better here. Let's check that out. If bishop c2, for example, now bishop d6 with a nice attack on the king side. Bishop e3, rook b2. It's looking pretty hairy for white. Rook b7. I don't know. It is a big advantage for black anyway. Perhaps this queen is better over here on the king side. But black is gonna win this a-pawn anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So queen d7. Now bishop e3 by white. e4. That was probably that was probably okay. White can't obviously take because this pawn is pinned sideways. So what does white do? He has to move this knight, and now Carlsen took this knight on d4, but he could have also taken on d3 first. So takes, and now he takes on d3. Bishop takes. It's fairly drawish still, so let's see where white goes wrong. Rook takes d3. The material is even, and black's pieces are quite far back. c5, bishop e5, a rook exchange, and c4, cementing this rook to d3. It's still inside of a draw. Bishop e5, bishop c5, rook b1. queen d5, rook b8 check, and here is where Svidler goes wrong, because yes, black has a big advantage. He has this strong rook on d3, but it's still a draw, so white shouldn't do anything risky. White plays queen h5, and the idea here is to play rook h8 check, king takes h8, then queen takes h6 check. Notice that this pawn is pinned, followed by queen to g7 mate. So mate in 3. Let me show you that. If black plays something silly like rook to d2, then bam, bam, bam. So, but black has many ways to counter this. He can play queen e6, protecting the h6 square. He can play queen e4. So where the queen can come to h7 to block the check from h6, and that's what black does. Queen e4, and white's king is not that safe either. White plays rook b2, and perhaps he doesn't sense any danger, but now black plays rook d5, and this bishop is pinned. So what can white really do here? He plays rook e2, protecting the bishop, but now there's queen b1 check, after which there's f6, just hitting this pinned piece, and white resigned here. Let's see if white could have done something differently. For example, was rook d2 forced? I mean rook b2. What if he moves this bishop somewhere? Let's say here. Oh, then it's a mate in 8, because this bishop can just be picked off like this because it's pinned. Okay, and then queen here, queen takes, this pawn is also pinned, rook check, king h2. Okay, so that's a pretty quick mate there. So black is threatening many things here. If white does nothing, then rook d5 is again a good move, but f6 even better. It's -5 here, believe it or not, because okay, this leads to back rank mate. Where can this bishop really go? There's like bishop takes f2 check. If king goes here, then this threatening mate, and there's really no good way to save that. So, and if king takes on f2, then rook d2 check anyway, king here, and now rook to g2 check, king here, rook to c2, threatening to come here, which would lead to a ladder mate, I believe. It's a mate in 17 already. Now queen d5, okay, queen takes d5, rook check, king takes h8, h5, queen g2, rook takes c3, and so on. I believe this is also mate. many ways to mate. Queen g5, for example. So again, the rook is working on the second and third ranks here, and the queen is also in close proximity, so there's many ways to win here. The bishop can just sacrifice itself. So here probably it's best to just give up the bishop and maybe play rook b2 again, guarding the second rank, but then we can just take the bishop and it's going to be over soon. We have an extra bishop and we have an attack going on, so we can play, for example, e3, e4, e3, rook e2, e3 anyway, f takes, bishop takes, and now rook has to take. Now we're up a rook, and soon white won't have any more checks. It's just a matter of time when we're gonna win this. So that's another way to finish white up. Of course, there's still rook d5, which is an excellent move. So white is really in trouble here, because rook d5 is coming, f6 is coming, this bishop is opposite the king, so this pawn is pinned. So there's not much that black can do in this situation anymore. I don't think it's easy to see, and Svidler didn't see it either. Maybe he just wanted to finish up Carlsen in a fancy manner, and of course that would have been sensational, but of course it didn't happen. In the 7th round, Carlsen played against Radjabov. Now Carlsen is more of a positional player, whereas Radjabov is a fierce attacking player. So let's see what happens. e4, and none other than c5 satisfies Radjabov. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, e6. Although I heard Nigel Short criticizing Radjabov that usually he doesn't do much in his games, he just draws, and that's how he became world number 4. So I don't know if that's true. Bishop takes c6, b takes c6, b3. So Carlsen is happy to give up his bishop in order to get this kind of like a long-term weakness for black, and then play a long positional grind, just putting your pieces to better places and winning in the long run. d6 by black, castle by white. Black's idea is often to play e5. That's what Gelfand used to play in the World Championship matches. Knight e7, but here white plays e5, and black plays knight g6, e takes d6, b takes d6, and now black has isolated double pawns and an isolated pawn here, but he does have 2 bishops and some attacking chances on the king side, because he has the 2 bishops. So knight c3, e5, opening up this bishop, rook e1, castle d3, f5. Very aggressive play by Radjabov here. Bishop a3, trying to win this c5 pawn. Bishop e6, knight a4, queen e7, still holding on to this c pawn. Now white played c4 to fix that pawn on c5. Rook a to d8. Queen e2, preparing to play queen e3 to c5. Bishop c8, and indeed queen e3. Now black played f4. Okay, harassing this queen. Queen goes to e4. Now it's hitting the c6 pawn. King h6 here. Now why doesn't white take this pawn? Let's check this variation. There's bishop b7, and now this queen has to go to b5, and it's really awkwardly placed. So that's why we have rook a to d1 instead. Bishop g4 by black. Rook d2. It's still much better for white. He should have played maybe h3. At least according to engine, it's much better. For many humans, this might look very threatening. You know, this attack going on here against the whites, and white doesn't seem to have many prospects on the queen side, but it's equal, believe me or not. So bishop took on f3, queen took, and now knight h4. Now white could have just taken this pawn, but he preferred to play queen e4. Maybe he was scared that something would happen. Usually when a grandmaster gives you a pawn, another grandmaster doesn't want to take it, even if it's good to take it. f3 by black here. Now g3 is a good move here. It allows the knight to come to g2, which is exactly what happened. But it's still equal. White played knight c3 here, and apparently that was a mistake. I don't know why white didn't move his rook. Of course, there are threats like queen e6 to h3, followed by knight f4, threatening mate on g2. But right now, white can, for example, play his no, not queen to h4, but let's see, if he plays rook to d1 or something, which is not very pleasant to do, then I'm sure white has some kind of defense here, like g4 maybe, and now rook f4. Okay, it's looking pretty bad for white actually, so maybe my engine failed there. So anyway, knight c3, giving the quality. Black doesn't want to take it yet. He thinks this knight is better than this rook, so he just plays queen e6, and now Carlsen plays rook e3, threatening to take this pawn. So now if black would play queen h3, white could just take this rook, and there's no mate because there's no pawn anymore protecting g2, so white can play like g takes f4 and he's fine. So that's why queen h3 doesn't work anymore, but black takes quality now with knight takes e3. Now f takes e3, and here Radjabov played f2 straight away with check, but perhaps it wasn't the best choice. He could have played bishop e7 or queen f5, just trying to mount some pressure, not giving up this pawn. Anyway, he played f2 check, trying to expose this king. Rook takes, king takes, rook check. But I guess he didn't see that white does have a fortress here. It doesn't matter that black has the quality, because what white does, he places king on e2 and queen on h1 or g2 if possible. And all of these squares are covered. There are no entry points for black. If white would have played his king to g2, then there's queen f7 threatening queen f1 mate, and there's really no way to prevent that. King has to go to h3, and now queen f1 comes anyway. Maybe queen g2, but now check from here. Queen takes d3. It looks pretty bad for white. Black can just take this knight, because if he tries to save that knight, then this pawn is falling, and it's just getting worse and worse right now. g6, this knight is gonna fall anyway, and yeah, so that's why king g2 would be a big mistake. You know, most players would probably play their king over here to the king side, to safety, and not to the center. But queen f7 is so strong that king e2 is the right move here. And now black played queen h3, not letting the white queen to g2, but white queen goes to h1, protecting against any f1 threats or h2 threats or g2 threats that this black queen is generating. Bishop e7 by black, knight e4 by white, so now this knight is taking care of any threats on f2. Queen g4 check, and king just goes to d2. All of these squares are covered. There's really no problems. Queen h3 again, h5, and we have some repetition, and they agreed to a draw. Hi guys, so in the 8th round the cycle starts again. Carlsen faces Aronian again after a rest day, I believe. He starts with c4. Both players are very careful. Knight f6, no contact between the pawns. Knight f3, e6, g3 and d5. There we have first contact between pawns, but it's not a critical one because either side can exchange pawns safely. Bishop g2, bishop e7, d4, castle, castle. Now Aronian takes on c4. Queen c2, planning on recapturing on c4. a6, queen takes, and now b5 with tempo. Queen goes back to c2, bishop b7. It's equal. Has white failed in the opening? Possibly. Bishop d2, bishop d6, improving the kingside bishop. a3, knight b to d7, b4, and again we have this identical pawn structure here. I remember from the first Aronian-Carlsen game in this tournament, I believe we had the same type of pawn structure, except here perhaps black's c-pawn could become weak, whereas white's d-pawn is considerably better. It's a central pawn. It can be supported with the e2 pawn if necessary. So let's see what happens. Rook a7, knight c3, queen a8, forming this nice battery along this diagonal. White wants to defuse that battery as soon as possible, so he plays knight h4. We have a couple of exchanges, and now black plays c6 here. Rook ac1 by white, and now a5 by black. So let's see how this pawn structure changes. Is this c pawn going to be a weakness? Knight e4 by white. Black takes, queen takes, and now rook c8. So now this rook is defended twice. Knight f4 by white. Now a takes b, bishop takes b, and suddenly this pawn is not as weak anymore, because it only has the d pawn kind of keeping it back. There's no pawn on b4 that would lock down this pawn to c6. And surely enough, black plays c5 here, so he's getting rid of that weakness. Queens are exchanged, and white exchanges his central pawn for the c5 pawn. Bishop takes c5. Knight f3, bishop goes back, rook exchange, rook b1, rook a8. Both sides want to play really carefully. They're both 2800 players. They respect each other. They don't want to take any risks. Bishop takes f8, king takes f8. Both rooks munch a pawn. g4, h6, and it's basically a draw already. But they still play on for a few moves here. This really is similar to the first Carlsen-Aronian game. There we also had rooks left, some pawns on the king side, also knights left, I believe, if I remember correctly. And I think Aronian suggested a draw earlier, but Carlsen didn't accept it. He wanted to push a little bit more, but it didn't work out in this game. Not against Aronian. So not a very eventful game. So in round 9, Carlsen played the black pieces against Kramnik. Let's see what happens this time. c4, e6. All of the players have played these super kind of passive openings. Now, personally, I don't like that, but what can I do? Everyone is playing like super duper modern openings, and so there's no pawn clashes and stuff. I think Ivanchuk is one of those players who are able to take advantage of this and build that classical pawn center. g3, d5, bishop g2. This is Kramnik's trademark, one of his trademarks, the Catalan. Bishop e7, knight f3, castle, castle, d takes c4. So now Carlsen is playing almost like Aronian in his last game. Knight e5, knight c6, bishop takes, b takes, knight takes. So now this is not a double pawn, because it's a dead pawn. It's going to be recaptured soon. Queen e8, and knight takes e7, queen takes e7, queen c2, e5 by Carlsen, and rook d1 by Kramnik. Let's see if there was something better that Vlad could have done. I think d takes e5 could have been better. Queen recaptures, maybe bishop f4 with tempo, queen e6, knight c3, and white has a comfortable advantage. Okay, but he did play just rook d1, a little bit passively. Vlad, maybe the most careful player out there. Rook b8 by black, perhaps just taking on d4 was best. Knight c3, h6. Nowadays players think that holding the tension is the best choice, you know, being patient. But as we often learn from computers, it's often best to just trade and take, you know, to stay active, to try to grasp the initiative. You know, some might say to take is a mistake, but I don't think that's completely true. Now white took on e5, and he did indeed play bishop f4 with tempo, queen e7 here. Another choice was queen to h5. Let's look at that. If white takes here, then a huge move, knight g4. White is to do something about this threat on h2, so h4, and now queen c5, hitting both c7 and f2. This is not something white would want to happen, so that's why white would not be able to play bishop takes c7 in that variation. However, black played queen e7, and now we have rook d4, centralizing the rook. Now it also works laterally, and it's immediately hitting this pawn. g5 was a nice move here, but Carlsen played bishop e6, a rook a d1, best move. Rook to b6. Okay, another choice was just to play rook f to d8, relieving some pressure on the d-file and offering to exchange rooks. Queen d2 here by white. Now white is permanently dominating the d-file, but let's see how much that is worth. King h7 here by white. f3, controlling these two squares. It's basically just a waiting move. Rook f to b8, so now black controls the b file, although it's not an open file, it's still a semi-open file, and this is a backward pawn, so I guess this is justified. But it is a big advantage for white actually. Queen e3 here by white. That was a mistake. Let's see what white should have done. White should have played queen c2. Look at that move. Just check, and then something like bishop c1, protecting that pawn, or knight a4, protecting that pawn and hitting this rook. Move like that, just slowly creeping forward, and black still is in control of this central file. You know, he's in control of things. But now he played queen e3, and it's slightly better for black. So I'm not sure what Vlad was thinking here. Maybe he was thinking he's gonna lose this pawn anyway. Often grandmasters think that if you start defending, then things start to get worse. You have to stay active. But sometimes it's better just to stand back and defend for a few moves. Rook takes b2, rook takes c4. And now black played rook 2 to b7. Perhaps that was not the best move. Perhaps better was to play rook 8 to b7 for some reason. Well, the main point is to defend this c7 pawn, and perhaps having a rook here is more useful than having a rook here on the first rank. But rook to b8, nevertheless. Rook a4 by white, and rook e8 here by black. Perhaps rook a8 was indeed better, because now white again has a huge advantage. White just takes on h7. There's an exchange of rooks, and look how white has pressure along the 7th rank, his pressure along files, and black's pieces are just cramped. You know, he has no space. So white has a huge advantage. Queen b4 here by black, best move, trying to grab some space, hitting this knight. Bishop e5 here, best move, defending that knight, perhaps threatening to take on f6. Now black should play perhaps bishop b3 with a discovery on white's bishop and also attacking white's rook. On d1, although this probably leads to white's victory as well. He did play knight d5, which might be an even better move. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now I think white doesn't have time for rook takes d5, because there's going to be queen e1 check, followed by queen e2 check, and now probably queen f2 and rook takes e5. So the material is even, but it's still equal actually. White has a slight advantage, just like he has in the opening, so white could have taken that bishop, but perhaps Vladimir thought, it's too risky, maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't really want to let Magnus's queen right next to my king. So he played queen takes c7, which is probably better. So now he's up 2 pawns. So a huge advantage for white. So let's see what happens here. Perhaps bishop takes a2 is best here. He played queen c4. He's even willing to exchange queens, but I think there's opposite colored bishops, so he thinks he's able to stop this a pawn with this bishop and this rook, because white can't really control the light squares. So white should not exchange queens. He should maybe play queen to d6 or something. Well, he played a3. Another option was to play e4, and here black played the best move, f6. So let's see what happens if black actually exchanges the queens. Can he really stop this pawn? Looks like white is not even trying to push this pawn, but now he's winning this g-pawn here, because this rook is passive, so it looks like this is winning for white, because black's troops are a little bit tied down. So anyway, black played f6, and now white exchanged queens and played bishop to c3, Rook e2 by black, and it's still a big advantage for white. But is it enough? Is it a theoretical draw? Rook d4 by white, bishop goes to b5, bishop b4, rook e3, king f2, and now it's actually a draw. Let's see where white went wrong. Here white still has a nice advantage. He could play something like f4, maybe protecting that pawn. Now I don't know if that 0.8 advantage is enough to win. It's only enough to win if it grows to like +2 or something. But if white is not able to push this pawn, then it's just a dead draw. And maybe it was even a dead draw here, no matter what white does. So king f2, check, and the rest of these moves are not really important. So in the 10th round, he played against Gelfand again. He started with e4, which he usually does against some of the lower rated players in the tournament. c5 by Gelfand. He's ready for a fight. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. So the old Sicilian with knight c6, and this bishop b5 move, it's quite rare actually in the Sicilian. So e6 by black, but lately it has been more popular. Castle, knight ge7. So now black is ready to replace this knight with another one in case white takes here, because Carlsen likes to cripple black's pawn structure. So now Gelfand is ready to keep it intact. Rook e1, a6, so the bishop does better to go back. And now d5. Look at this beautiful pawn structure by black. E takes, and black took with a knight, which is probably better. Now this bishop can get out too. And d4 here by white, striking in the center. Black should probably just take on d4 here, but he wanted to be fancy and play knight f6. That's not bad either. Here white can take on c5 if he wants to, but white played bishop e3. He wants to develop a piece instead. So now it's actually a little bit better for black. He takes on d4, knight takes on d4, and black played e5 here, which is probably, sorry, e5 would have probably been best, but he played bishop d7, and now the advantage is again on white's court. Now what should white do here? Maybe knight c3? Seems like a fast, logical move, getting that knight out. But Carlsen played c4, wanting to use that pawn before he develops this knight, which is understandable, but a little bit slow. Black could play something like queen c7 here, putting pressure on this pawn. And it's a nice square for the queen anyway, it's safe, and it can form a battery with the bishop or something. He played knight takes d4. Now it's again slightly better for white. He took on d4, and now he played bishop c6, the best move. Now this structure is solid on the queen side. This bishop is really strong, eyeing the king side. But white is still a little bit better. He has more space, and he's more developed. He has castled already, so he can play moves like knight c3, which he did, and now black still has to develop. So moves like queen a5 maybe, or b6 come to question here, perhaps preparing bishop c5. Black played bishop e7, which is not bad either, and white played a3, preparing a possible b4 c5 advance. White also had moves like queen d3, but he's gonna play that next turn. So a3 and a5 by black, trying to restrain b4. Now queen d3, so at least b5 is not possible. Castle by black, rook a d1 by white. So now the queen is protected once more, and white even has some pressure along the d-file. And this queen stands well on d3 because it's gonna use the third rank to move laterally against black's king. So that's how it will contribute to the attack, because it was impossible to move diagonally because of this knight and this bishop. So this is kind of like a queen lift. Queen c7 by black, bishop e5, best moves. Queen b6, and now white could play queen c2, but perhaps better is to play queen h3 or queen g3, and Carlsen did play queen g3. It's probably the best move, and white has a comfortable advantage here. He has some pressure on the king side. And now black played rook f d8. Let's see what would have happened if black would have just taken the b pawn, because I'm sure that's a question that comes to everyone's mind. So here, knight d5 with a nice discovery on the queen, also hitting the bishop, so the bishop cannot be saved here, except black can play queen a3, protecting the bishop, and the bishop is protecting the queen. But here, white can play knight takes f6. Can white even play something like rook d3? Yeah, I guess, but the queen can still stay on the same diagonal, protecting the bishop. But what white can really do here is play knight f6 check. So now the bishop can't take because it's protecting the queen. So black can't recapture because this pawn was also pinned. So now white is up a piece. He can play rook d3. This bishop is no longer under attack, but where is this queen going to go? If this queen wants to save itself, then we're gonna have something like knight d7, forking these two. If bishop takes, then this is made in one. So that was the main threat here. Knight d7 hits the queen, hits the rook, and threatens mate. So this is getting really complicated here. So that's why something like queen c5 is just not possible. There's no time for that. So black would have to just eliminate this knight, and then white just picks up this queen here. So that's why black did not take this pawn. It's indeed a poisoned pawn. There's a lot of tension here. With the bishop, the knight can jump in, and maybe a rook lift. There's a lot going on. So black played rook f to d8, giving this f8 square for the black king if needed. Rook takes d8 and queen takes d8 here. Now this queen is a little bit more active again, except that white plays rook d1 straight away. Perhaps bishop d3 was more challenging, eyeing this h7 square. And now queen goes back to b6. White played bishop d4. I don't really know the purpose of that move. Engine suggestions are maybe knight b5, maybe bishop d3, maybe rook d2, but okay, bishop d4, hitting the queen, maybe tempting it to take here. Again, there's some tactics with knight d5, so the queen can't really take the pawn. Instead, it just goes right next to it. It's kind of humiliating for the queen to have to do this. There's this pawn right in front of you, but you can't take it. So rook d3 here by white, activating this rook. It's actually drawish here. Queen c2, nice move. And now Carlsen played b4. a-took, and notice how black can't take for the second time, because then this knight would hang, because this pawn is pinned. So that's why b4 was possible, and now black pretty much has to find the only move, knight h5, protecting g7 and getting out of danger. Queen e5 here, hitting the knight and still keeping this mate threat on. Bishop f6 here. White takes the knight and black takes the bishop. White takes the bishop and black takes the knight. So it's still a draw. 5 pawns each. So let's see how Carlsen again outplays his opponent in the endgame. A very nice move here, taking advantage of the weak back rank. Notice that white has one shooter here, shooting the back rank, and now he's going to bring another one, queen a5. So black can't take the queen because it would be made in two. So now black goes rook f8, and now queen b6, and white is again on the driver's seat with a huge advantage. Everything protected and ready to push these pawns forward. So really nice maneuver, getting the queen with tempo to the queen side. e5 by black, and now white played rook d1, but perhaps rook d8 is better, just harassing the 8th rank. g6 was played by black, but perhaps h6 is safer. Okay, b5 by white, the best move. Bishop e4, best move. And here you could play rook d7, just put that pig to the 7th and not worry about the first rank. Let's look at that a little bit. If black plays something like, well, he can't play bishop d3 right now, but queen c1 pinning this guy, then we can play queen d6 if we want. This is still protected, but we can play queen d6. So now there's again no bishop d3, and we have everything under control. We're threatening the e pawn at some point. It's a big advantage. Rook d7. White played queen f6 here, which also tries to control more squares, but that's a slight inaccuracy because now it's getting more drawish. Black can play something like bishop f5, and he has everything protected. What he played here was h5, and now again rook d7 is a huge move. Instead, white played h4. Now black played bishop f5. And here Carlsen played rook d5, very good move, activating the rook, threatening the e-pawn immediately. Perhaps rook e8 was needed here, but what black did was he went crazy. Queen c1, just trying to get some counterplay here. He thought, you know, I'm gonna lose my e-pawn anyway. Well, I'm gonna try to win piece or something, mate white or something like that. So queen takes e5, huge advantage for white. Bishop e6, rook d4, and I don't think black can even recover from this anymore. Rook a8, queen e2, king h7, rook d1, queen c3, queen e4, rook a1, takes c5, and these pawns are forced to reckon. You can't ignore those pawns. Queen c3, queen takes b7. Let's see what happens if black takes this pawn. There's just gonna be b6, and now king moves here in order to free the bishop. Queen b8, bishop d5, not the immediate b7 because that could fall to queen b6, but instead queen c7 or even queen e5 check, followed by queen c7, forcing the queen exchange. And now look at this bishop, it has to stand here, so white can play something like this, getting ready to support this pawn. So bishop e8. Can this king get closer? Then this pawn is gonna fall. So probably better is something like f5. Now f4 and king f6, and this king is just gonna march here because this king is tethered to this pawn. So that would be completely winning if black would take this pawn. So that's how critical the situation is already. Instead black played queen e1, and now white doesn't worry about this bishop, he doesn't worry about his king safety, he just plays b6. Queen e7 was also possible. Now bishop c4, and here white doesn't push immediately because he is a little bit worried about the situation here. Let's see what happens if c6. Now black is better because after king h2 there's bishop d5 threatening mate, threatening this pawn. So f3, maybe queen c4 hitting this guy, and it's pinned so he can't move forward. So now this pawn will be lost and black is actually better and probably winning. So that's why white doesn't push c6 immediately. He plays queen f3. So now when queen f1 check, king h2, now there's no bishop d4 threatening nasty stuff on g2 and stopping these pawns. Now white is in control of these light squares. So this white queen is kind of acting like a bishop right now. Queen b1 by black, at least controlling the b8 square, but there's no way to stop b7 followed by c6, and that's what white plays, b7, c6, and black resigned here. If the white queen moves, for example here, sure, black wins this pawn, but then the b8 square is supported, so this would be winning for white. So in round 11, Grischuk was playing white pieces. Again, we get this kind of modern approach. Grunfeld by Carlsen. H4, that's definitely something that Carlsen wasn't expecting. C6 by black, just playing in the center. Bishop G5. Castle. So black is continuing his attack on the king side, but will this actually lead into something? Black could just take on c4 here and try to occupy the center. Instead he plays bishop f5, and believe it or not, this gives a huge advantage for white. Let's see what white could have done here. H takes g6, f takes g6, and now there are moves like c takes d5 or queen b3. Let's look at c takes d5, and now queen b3, hitting both of these pawns here. So the weakness often with bishop f5 is that it leaves this pawn unattended. So let's see, black would have had to play e6 here probably to save this central pawn, but now black can just take on b7, and he's down a pawn. Does he have some compensation? Sure, he's more developed, but I definitely think that white should have gone for this. Was Magnus bluffing? I don't know. Maybe he thought there's no other way to develop, and he has to develop this bishop now in order to also protect the g6 square. So perhaps if Grischuk would have taken here, then Carlsen would have taken with the bishop. But this is even better for white, because now he could play this and queen b3 anyway, and let's say, okay, if e6 here, then this is even better for white. It's probably gonna play bishop d3, exchange it for this bishop. He can play some kind of pawn storm or something. But anyway, white played e3 instead, and now it's equal again because black is able to play queen b6 here, countering any queen b3 ideas and hitting on b2, protecting b7. But what Carlsen played here was e6, so now this pawn is protected. So now the only weakness that black has is this b7 pawn. Here black took on g6, and Carlsen took back with the bishop, although probably better is to take with the f pawn, leaving the g file closed. Now white played bishop d3, which is probably not bad, but queen b3 was probably better. Okay, so here black played knight d7, but perhaps taking here is called for because this bishop is put under a question, like what is it going to do? Is it going to take here? Is it going to capture here? But black played knight d7. It's slightly less challenging, and this is a comfortable advantage for white. He could definitely try to press for a win somehow. He played queen to e2, e5 by black. Okay, totally okay move, justifiable move. So now what white did, he took on g6, which is a good move, maybe the best move. Let's see what would have happened after d takes e5. It's seemingly boring position, but a lot can happen here. I think black would have taken also on the d file, and now perhaps knight e4, and if black takes on e3, white can take on c6, so perhaps something like this, and now this, and this. This is considerably better for black, so let's see if white could have done something better there. Taking on here is awkward, so I think this would have been a bad move in the end, because black has pressure on d4 and he might have pressure on the e file as well. And also, if this knight moves, which it is probably forced to do after e takes d4, then this queen has this diagonal here. So bishop takes g6 was probably the best move. Black has to react to that. He took with the h pawn, and now white took on e5 before black takes with the same pawn on d4. Knight takes e5. C takes d. Black has an isolated pawn, but is it a weakness? It's also a central pawn, so it could be an asset. Rook d1 here. Let's look at an interesting move here. Knight takes e5. No, sorry, that was a mistake. Okay, rook d1. Queen a5. Okay. So, can white take this pawn now? Let's look at rook takes d5. Apparently knight takes f3 is good, and now there's bishop takes c3, followed by queen takes c3, and the material is even, and the chances are even too. Both of the kings are a little bit weak. So white wants to keep his advantage, and that's why he played king f1, getting out of this pin. Perhaps even better was knight to d4, with many possibilities. Rook a to d8, best move. Knight d4, best move. Now black played queen to c5. That's probably an okay move. Actually, it does increase white's advantage a little bit. Well, if white were to play knight b3, which he does, it's perhaps not so bad, because black can still play queen c4 and he's protecting this pawn, or he can play queen c6 and he's still protecting that pawn, so it's not the end of the world. It's a slight advantage for white still. Knight h5, queen c7. And maybe you're wondering, can't white take this pawn now? And I'm wondering the same thing. Yes, he could take, and he should take it. That would lead into a draw, because yes, black is hitting this knight, but for example, knight takes d5, queen takes here, queen takes f6, check, king g7. Knight comes back to e4, and it's draw. It's a little bit better for black even, because he can take on a2, so he has this pawn majority here. So that's why white played knight b3 instead, and now black queen went back to c6, protecting this pawn, and white was happy with a draw. They repeated moves here, but what could have white done? He could have kept the game alive, play something like rook h3, maybe with king g1 or something, a future doubling of the rooks or something. Um, he could have tried to keep the game alive, but essentially it's a drawish position, not very interesting position. So I understand why they actually repeated the moves. Now round 12 was maybe the most interesting round. Not thanks to Carlsen though, but to his opponent, Ivanchuk, which suddenly woke up to playing great chess in the last rounds of the tournament. Maybe he had great positions also in other games, but many times he lost on time. He's kind of like an old school player, and old as well, so maybe if there would just be more time for the players, then he would have done better. During the first 40 moves, there's no increment, so there's no extra time per move, so it's really brutal. If you get in time trouble, you have to blitz your moves, and you might even lose on time if you're not careful. So I'd like to do a separate video about Ivanchuk's performance, but I don't know if I have time for that. So e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, the old Sicilian again, knight c3, closed Sicilian. Here common choices for black are e5 or g6. Ivanchuk played e6, intending an early d5, possibly. d4 by white, takes, queen c7. So this is like a Taimanov, I believe. Bishop e3. This is a very aggressive variation, maybe f3, queen d2, that sort of stuff with the English attack. a6, standard move, queen d2, knight f6, and already white castles long. So this is really double-edged. Bishop b4 by black, and I really liked this move. It's not very common, but it is a developing move. It pins this knight to the queen, and also it enables this knight to jump to e7, which is Chucky's next move, which I think was a brilliant move. Now, Chucky knows his openings very well, and on a good day he can win anyone. He can get an advantage against you, either with white or black pieces, and retain an advantage and just grow it with every move, and there's nothing you can do about it. So f3 by white, and now knight e7. Now there are many purposes to this move. Of course it supports the d5 break as well, but also it prevents white from playing this f5 so easily, which is often a very typical break for white in this attack, where he just rolls these pawns forward, this English attack. It's gonna become increasingly difficult for white to play f5, especially if he plays e5 at some point, which he will play after black plays d5. So it's all about controlling these squares here, and that's what this knight is doing. So it's a very sneaky move, and here Carlsen spent a lot of time trying to find a good move here. Apparently the best move would be just to counter this with knight d to e2, opening up this d file and making d5 that more difficult, and then playing a3 shortly after. So this knight e7 move, this backtracking move, actually forces white to play defensively as well. But Carlsen played knight b3, which is not bad either. But now it allows d5, and white played e5, uh, knight d7 by black, and now white almost has to play f4 to support this e5 pawn. Okay, it's not catastrophical. Still, black has a slight advantage, but if I would be white, I would be worried about these pawns rolling down, this rook, this bishop, everything just hitting white's king, whereas white also has to, come up with his own attack. How is he going to do it? If he wants to get f5 in, he needs to get g4 in, and whenever he pushes f5, this e pawn falls, and then black is in control of the center, so this flank attack is not working anymore. So if I would be white, this would be like a nightmare. Like, I wouldn't know what to do. Black played b6. It's a nice move. b5 would maybe give up some of the dark square control that black has. Bishop d4 here. It's a nice move. Carlsen was too strict towards himself when he said afterwards that that was a stupid move. No, it was probably the best move. Bishop d4. Now black played knight c5. It's a nice move, typical in the Sicilian, just getting that knight closer. Okay, here black probably should have taken that knight and not worry about the b file opening. He can play a3 later and maybe c4 here by black, knight d4, perhaps bishop c5. Anything really goes here, and well, okay, actually black's advantage is growing, so maybe this would not be the way that white would want to play. Let's go back. It's already difficult to find good moves for white here. What Carlsen played, I really admire his skill. He played a3. I think that's a great move, because it doesn't really increase black's advantage at all. It wants to simplify the position. See, black is attacking on the queen side, and white would like to attack on the king side because it's like opposite castling, where black hasn't castled yet, but it's most likely that he will castle on the king side. So it's like a race. So if you can't win that race, then what else can you do? You can try to open up the center when it makes flank attacks difficult, if not impossible, and it changes the game to like an open game, even though the sides are castled on opposite sides. Well, white can't really open up the center here, but what he can do, he can simplify. So he's just saying, get out of my house, bishop, and what black does here first is knight e4, okay? And some of the commentators say that there's no time for a3, but there is time for a3. What's the problem with knight e4? There's no problem, okay? There's going to be some simplifications here. Bishop takes, so the bishop was also protecting c3. Now, bishop takes, queen takes, b takes. Okay, white's structure is maybe worse, but doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. There's so many pieces on the board that it really doesn't matter. Here, a5 by black, and it's a draw again. Black should have probably played bishop b7, and he would have a slight advantage. a5. That's a little bit committal. White played knight d4. Perhaps c4 is better, getting rid of this weakness straight away. Bishop a6, and white played bishop d3, hoping for black to take so he could repair this pawn structure, but black played king d7, king d2, knight c6 here by black. Perhaps better was bishop c4, cementing this knight on c4. Rook b1 by white. Bishop takes d3, and here king took on d3, and I don't really understand that. Maybe white wants to keep this pressure, or that doesn't make any sense to me. Let's look at c takes d3. Okay, then black can take here, so white would have double pawns anyway. But after king takes, it gets worse for white. He loses his edge. Rook a to b8 here, best move. Not playing rook h to b8, because then this rook here would stay totally passive. So very important detail. Try not to get your rooks too cramped on one side of the board. Try to keep as much room for them to move. So, and here it's totally drawish, and what Carlsen did was he played knight b5, wanting to come to d6 and just pressing for an advantage. He managed to survive to a drawish endgame, and now he should be happy about that. But of course he's Carlsen, and he wants to press forward, being that Ivanchuk is one of the kind of low-seated players in the tournament. So he should have played something like rook h to d1, or rook b5, or I don't know, knight takes c5. Well, knight b5 is not bad either. And here a typical idea, g5 striking at the bottom of this pawn island here. It's not really a pawn sacrifice, because if white takes on g5, then black takes on e5 and has a tremendous pawn center. So g3 here by white. Now rook h to g8, best move again, threatening to open up this g file and get some action for this rook. c4 here by white, but perhaps better was to just contest this g file, because now g takes f4 and g takes f4, and notice if d takes c4 here, then black would do, white would not want to take on c4, because there's rook g4 threatening this pawn and threatening to take the e pawn as well, because this pawn is pinned. So this would not be a good choice for white. Instead, black plays knight e7 here, and it's drawish again. Black had a chance here with d takes c4 to regain the initiative and the advantage, but Chucky played knight e7, so even he didn't find the best moves in this endgame. Rook h to d1 was played here by white, but again, rook h to g1, but probably better was to play rook h to d1. d takes c4, king takes c4, knight d5. Very nice knight on d5, but this knight is not bad either. So white, actually it's dead equal. Knight d6, king c6, and both players have played 30 moves. Now this game is gonna be 90 moves, so we're only 1/3 of the way. Knight takes on f7, knight takes on f4. Okay. King b3 here by white, maybe not the best. King c5, black king is getting more active. Knight g5, knight goes to e4, knight f6, and it seems that Chucky is pressing, and white doesn't have a clear plan anymore. Let's see if he could have done things a little bit differently here. Instead of king b3, maybe a4, staying active, standing your ground, not going backwards, just standing your ground. Maybe c3, standing your ground, or maybe rook takes g8, staying active and going forward, always like pushing forward if possible. Okay, but anyway, we arrived here, I believe, and it is an advantage for black. White plays rook e1, protecting this pawn. Now rook c3 check, rook f3, rook e4 check, and knight d7 check here, trying to weave some kind of a mating net here if possible. Black king, however, goes to d5, and now knight f6 again. I think Carlsen would be happy to repeat here, since he's noticing that this game might slip out of his hands. But Chucky is not content for a draw anymore. He can sense the fear in Carlsen's eyes. King c5, knight d7 check again, and now Chucky decides not to repeat, but to go for king c6, and now knight g6, king b5, rook e4, and this is often the problem when one side wants to draw but the other one doesn't. Then the side that wants to draw is just gonna trying to make compromises, trying to exchange pieces, trying to create peace, but it doesn't work if the opponent is trying to kill you. So it's better to try to play aggressively until the end, because that gives you better chances of getting that draw. So rook f5 here by black, double pressure on e5, and that pawn is actually going to fall. Knight c7, knight takes e5, knight can't take on e6 because there would be a fork with the king on d5. Rook h4, hitting the h pawn of black. King d6, protecting the e pawn. The central pawn is more valuable than this h pawn. It's also a passed pawn, and it's not a rook endgame yet. There are still knights on the board, so knight b5 check, and a4. Okay, so it's already almost winning for black here. h5 by black, protecting this pawn as well. Knight d4, rook e4, and now black is ready to exchange rooks, but white shouldn't do that, probably. He played rook h4. Let's see what would have happened after rook takes e5. Maybe h4, knight g6, e5, e4, king e5. This pawn is really dangerous. e3, knight takes h4. Let's see what happens if e2. This knight is still protecting, but black can just take a knight and it should be winning. Now there's no fork, and it's probably over. So that's why rook h4 by Carlsen, and knight d6, king d3, c4, knight f3, knight d2. So now black has this one extra pawn, so let's see how he can get it through, or can he win even more pawns here? Which pawns could he go for? Maybe he's gonna target this pawn next. Which he does. So does this force the knight exchange? I think so. And now this pawn doesn't really have a good protector. H4 was the best move actually here. That enables white to protect that pawn from behind. King d6, rook d3 check. Perhaps, well, king c6 or king e6, both were fine. And I'm wondering if this is actually a draw, like theoretically speaking. Maybe against a computer, Chucky would not have been able to win. Rook g3, king f6, rook d3, rook f4, rook d6 check, and black's advantage is diminishing a little bit. King f5, rook takes b6, rook takes h4. C5 here by white, and that was the last mistake that Carlsen did. Let's see what he should have done. I mean, of course he's nervous. He's thinking, well, I got a passed pawn. I'm gonna, capitalize on it. But the fact is he's losing his a pawn, and it's just not gonna work. So what could he do here? Maybe rook b5, an active move. That would have been the way to go, and it could still be salvageable, this position. Just take it easy, but c5, now it's really over. He played rook h6, but it doesn't really matter anymore. Rook d6. He didn't even take this pawn, even though that's why he went there. So let's see what would have happened after that. Well, there can be king d5, just eliminating this last child of white. And now it's a difficult battle, because this rook is kind of outside, and this king is between these pawns, and it's just really difficult to stop these pawns here. Let's see what's the proper technique here. King b5. Rook comes to c5. e4. This is also a very good endgame lesson for anyone. e3. Very bold move. Now this pawn is pretty far advanced. Just boldly pushing that pawn. e2 even, and look at this rook, it's totally passive. So what we could have here is just king c5, just dropping this pawn, and then just coming closer, coming to d2, and it's over. So that's one way of converting that particular endgame. In some situations, if there are pawns at this length, the other player can stop them. Or maybe if it's like, maybe if it would be two rook pawns, then it would be easier to stop. But here the king can use one of these pawns like as a shield, and it can support one of the pawns easier. So king e4, rook to d6 by white. Rook d4, rook a6, king d5, rook a5. Now rook is picking up this pawn. Rook to c7, even e4 was possible there. Rook to h4. really intense game, and now white is pretty much in Zugzwang. He can't stand in front of the pawn anymore. So king f5, king e2 doesn't really matter. Now this rook is also being driven away from behind, I mean in front of this pawn. So now this pawn is pushing, and now it's a little bit different. In the previous example we had pawns which are like 3 files apart. Here the pawns are 2 files apart, but it's still winning. It doesn't change anything. I guess there are many ways to do this. Looks like this pawn is about to fall, but what black is doing here, he's distracting white king to the corner, and now look what he's doing. He's isolating that king to the h file, and now this king and pawn are just gonna march down the board, and after rook f1 check, Carlsen resigned. So a tremendous psychological crush. This game, long game, sucks to lose a 7-hour game. It really imprints on your mind. You really remember that and blame yourself for a long time. But let's see what happened in the next round. So round 13 was just as exciting as round 12, because now Carlsen was half a point behind Kramnik, because Ivanchuk finally got himself together psychologically. If he would be able to do that every round, then the tournaments would be perhaps more predictable. Anyway, d4 by Radjabov, and now Carlsen pretty much has to win. So let's see what happens here. He plays like some kind of hedgehog formation, so not very ambitious. Okay, e5 by white, castle, c6, interesting structure, trying to control d5 and also getting ready to get the queen out. Rook d1, rook e8. So now d takes e, d takes e, and a3. Bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, and queen e7. b4 by white, bishop e3, knight g4, knight d2. f5 by black. So he's really trying to press forward here. Was that really a good move? It did give white a slight advantage. He played h3, knight took on e3, and now perhaps best move for black is to play f4 here, striking at g3, but Carlsen played e4. It also gains more space and blocks in this bishop and takes squares from all of the pieces, so I guess it's also a good move. Rook a to c1 by white, c5 was also possible, but I guess Radjabov wants to keep this knight out of d5. Bishop e6, queen c3, rook a d8, best move. Bishop f1 by white. Personally, I don't understand these grandmaster moves. c5 by black. White took on c5, and it is a slight advantage for black. Let's see what else white could have done. He should have probably played e3, and if black is going to take on b4, then queen can just take, and everything is protected here. Instead, taking on c5, now the queen gets closer. Queen could have come to c5. White plays knight a4 first, and now he takes with the knight. This is a comfortable advantage for black. Let's see if white could have done something different. No, queen b4 seems like the best move. So very nice maneuver there by black. He has a nice knight on c5, taking advantage of the fact that this isolated pawn can't kick this knight out. So if you can put a knight in front of your opponent's isolated pawn, then do it by all means. Knight b3 by white, a rook exchange, and now black should probably just take that knight and then play rook c8, pressuring this c pawn. Instead he plays knight a6, which wastes some of the advantage. We have a queen exchange and now e3. Now this is again an equal endgame. Black is a little bit better, but it doesn't really matter. King f7, bishop e2, b6, rook d8, knight c5. So nice post for that knight. White should probably take it, but he plays knight d4, king f6, king f1, rook d7, and here white could just exchange the rooks if he wants to draw. He prefers to keep the rooks on, which is probably an even better chance at holding onto a draw, because you can always be annoying with this rook. But clearly white is not trying to win here or anything, and probably neither should black. King e1, g6, h4, h6, rook c8, bishop e6, check, rook h8, rook c7, and this rook can't take that pawn because now the rook would actually be trapped. So that's why knight b5, a fork, rook d7, and h5 would be an interesting move here. But knight d4, and now black plays h5, protecting this h-pawn. So this rook managed to fix the kingside pawn structure. So now the only place where Magnus can focus on is the kingside to get some kind of advantage. It's like trying to squeeze blood from a stone, like Amazingoid would say. Rook f8 check, bishop f7, rook c8, king e5, rook a8, a6, rook c8, rook d6, rook c6 check, and actually I might have the board flipped. No. Mine was just black. I'm sorry. I'm getting tired. I'm doing so many games. Knight c6 check. King f6. Knight d4. Bishop e6. So now he's trying to just get rid of this rook because it's a pest, and black can't really move forward if this rook keeps getting checks, keeps giving checks from the back rank, which it does again. Rook d7, rook b8, rook b7, and now Radjabov is just feeling pissed off, you know. He just wants to draw, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna exchange the rooks but I'm gonna get a draw anyway. And sure enough, it is still a draw. But perhaps it's now more difficult for him to defend against one of the best endgame players in the world. King c3, bishop f7, knight b3, king e5, bishop e1, a5. So of course this is committal, and now it should be a dead draw, but you have to make pawn moves also, so it won't be a draw. Bishop e2, bishop e6, bishop f1, bishop d7, bishop e2, and like Magnus said, he just had to keep on going, because that's all he had, you know. He had to catch Kramnik, because he was a half point behind. So even if Kramnik would draw, which is the most likely result for him usually, or for most chess players usually, then Carlsen would still have to win. So bishop a4, knight d4. So let's see how he does it. Knight c5, king b2, bishop e8, and we still have 32 moves to go. King c3, bishop f7, knight c6 check, king d6, knight d4, knight d7, knight b5 check, king c5, knight d4, and now the advantage is still only slight for black. He could have played a4, but that's highly committal, and I don't know if that would give black anything. Probably it would just kill the position totally. So black wants to keep the position alive and some kind of chances alive. Knight b3 check, king c6. Now white plays a4. Now many people criticize this move because this might become a target. It's difficult to see now. I mean, white just wants to keep black out of here and just fix this pawn structure and show that it's a dead draw. But this bishop can target that pawn, this knight can target that pawn, and now white has kind of two weaknesses, because this pawn can also be targeted. So now black has a comfortable advantage. He played king d7, king d6, king c5, and bishop e8. He's also building, you know, the time pressure. He's making quick moves, and while white is defending, he has to think after every move. You know, does he have something, or is he just bluffing? You know, that's what you have to do when you're trying to crush the opponent psychologically. What it's usually about, or many times about in chess, with these small gestures. So knight b3 check, king d6, and now c5 check. It's already a lot better for black. Let's see where it went wrong. White should have played king b3. Instead he played knight b3 check, and what this enables is now after king d6, white doesn't have a lot of moves. Like if he goes back here, then this pawn falls, and there's really no compensation for that. So knight b3 was really a mistake. So now white pretty much has to play c5 with tempo, and black could take that pawn, but instead he played king c7, which was probably a mistake because now it's a draw again. White can play king d4 and hitting the knight with tempo, protecting this pawn, and everything should be fine. He can even get a bishop to b4. So black should have probably taken that pawn. Anyway, well, white did play king d4, but now black played knight c6 check. The king went back to c3, and it should be drawish again. Black played the best move, knight to e7, getting ready to possibly come here, 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 stuff like that. So that's why knight e7, really good move. And here c takes b6, best move, king takes b6. Okay, so material is even again. We still have 16 moves to go. Knight d2, best move. And this pawn is falling, so now black has a one pawn advantage. Knight c4 check, king a6, knight a3 check, discovered check, king b7, and now it's actually a draw, but white should have played king a7 actually, but it's very difficult to know these things. King b7, now knight c4, and white has this mill just grinding here, rotating, and how can black get past that? Well, he played king a6 again, so there's some repetition. Now he goes to a7, so maybe he realized that this is somehow better. Let's see what happens if knight goes to c4 now. Well, now there's bishop b5 ideas, and suddenly this knight is pinned. It doesn't have any discoveries against the king on b7. So now white would have to play something like bishop d1, and now we can have maybe knight c6, and there might be some play here because these pieces are a little bit discoordinated. So that's why after king a7, white plays king d4 instead of knight c4. And here, a very nice move by Magnus, knight c6 check. Now, isn't he worried that this white king is gonna come to the king side and eat these pawns? No, because let's see what would happen. We get this knight here, or maybe this is better move. Knight d3 check, and knight takes f2, and then there's knight h1. So if king takes here, we just take this pawn. This is protected, and what can white really do here? This is also protected. He can't really hit the knight either, because if he goes here, then well, just loses the bishop. So it's also a fork, and if he plays something like this, then we just take here, and these guys are protected, so he can exchange here and then push this guy forward, and then this guy will promote. So this is something that Carlsen had to see before he played knight to c6, and this is something that Radjabov also calculated before he answered knight c6 check with king c5 instead of king d5, trying to get to the king side. Now black played knight e5, which is a nice move, I guess. Knight b4, also good. Knight c4 here by white, but black doesn't want to exchange knights. He goes to d3, and now white should have probably exchanged. Let's see if this is totally false, but e takes d3, king d4, bishop c2, king c3, a4, knight a3, king b6, takes, and this is probably winning for black, because this king is gonna be occupied with this pawn, and in the meanwhile this king is gonna destroy these pawns. So okay, the bishop can't take the knight on d3. Instead, black played king d4, and now black has another trick, knight c1, hitting this bishop. So suddenly this bishop doesn't really have any squares, so it has to go to f1, and now it's kind of stuck there. So this is a great example of piece control, how these pieces are just dominating these other pieces. You know, they're of same value, but these guys are just, you know, beating up those other guys. So, and now bishop b5. Now this knight is pinned, so even this knight can't move. What white played here was knight a5, just giving up this bishop, but perhaps he should have played something like king c3, but it's probably hopeless. So knight takes a5, bishop takes f1, and now just check, knight e7, and black is up a piece, and it's gonna be really difficult for white. He has just lost the game. Black can just play something like bishop to g4 if he wants to, and everything is protected, and then this pawn is gonna fall soon. So, and then this pawn. So, game over. Okay, so his last game was against Svidler, and he was playing the white pieces. Now Svidler maybe wasn't one of the best players in the tournament, but still very dangerous. He beat Chucky, for example, with a very unorthodox surprise, and yeah, he's a very psychological player, and the tournament standings were such that Kramnik and Carlsen were tied with the even score, and if they would remain, if they would keep the even score, then Carlsen would win because of the tiebreak. He has more wins. So Carlsen was very nervous. He didn't know what he should have tried to do, try to win or keep a draw or something. Certainly he shouldn't try to lose. But anyway, he didn't know which result to play for, and this might be really confusing. So he just went through some moves, and usually it's normal for him to try to play optimal moves. But here he had to kind of, he didn't know what to play for, maybe for draw, maybe for win. So his opponent just ended up steamrolling him. So d6, a3, sorry, a3, and he was really getting in time trouble too. I don't know if he was checking the other game or something, maybe not, but that's, he told that he wasn't checking the other game, but because he can't really do anything about it. But so bishop d2, we can already see a very passive move. Queen d7 by black, a4. Also, maybe not the best. Why did he play first a3, first a4? This is definitely not the Magnus we know. Black can play b4 if he wants here, or knight a5 is a nice move as well, hitting the bishop. Svidler played knight d8, a takes b, a takes b, and now a rook exchange. White has a slight advantage, just like in the opening. Knight e2 here, I don't know what that does really, and neither does the computer. Knight e6, very logical, nice move. Knight g3, okay, so that's where the knight was heading. c5 by black. Probably better was just to play bishop b7 and get that bishop out of the corner. So knight f5 here by white. Almost looks like white doesn't have a plan. He's just playing standard moves that he knows that are okay in the Ruy Lopez, but are they good in this particular position? Bishop d8 by black. c4. Okay, so he's trying to make d5 more difficult for black, but now just b takes c4, bishop takes c4, and it's still drawish. Bishop c7, best move. Rook e1, best move, and rook e8. Now a nice move, queen c1. That doesn't do much actually. Maybe there's some idea to play bishop h6 followed by queen h6 and some kind of mating threats or something. Black plays knight h5 here, so perhaps he got scared of the mate. g3 by white, preventing knight f4, so Carlsen is also afraid. g6 by black, knight h6 check, and then the knight comes back to g5, which is not necessary. White could just play b4 as well, or queen c2 even. So knight g5, and let's see what happens if king takes. Okay, well, this is pretty devastating. g5 has to be played, and now white just wins a pawn. And this comes again, and there's queen d1 stuff, and it's looking really hairy for black. So it's not a good idea to take a knight when Carlsen offers it to you for free. So knight takes g5, bishop takes g5, d5. Okay, so e takes d5, bishop to d5, and now knight back to g4. So white has excellent dark square control, and he probably thinks that he's much better. I mean, I think any human would evaluate this much better for white, but it's actually drawish, if not even a bit better for black. So Carlsen was spending a lot of time here. He was in time trouble for the first time in this tournament, and it's really rare for him. I've never seen him in time trouble before, and perhaps he was trying to find a finisher, you know, a mate or something. He thought he's much better, and he's just gonna use the rest of his time to find some killer moves. But what ended up happening is that he had like a few minutes for like 20 moves, which is crazy. No one can make good moves in such a low time. So bishop f3 by white, bishop f6 check. Also bishop h6 check was possible. Of course this looks threatening to black, but it's nothing to worry about. King f7, f8, sorry. And there's really no tricks for white. If he tries something like this, then black takes this bishop, and then queen h6 check. King can just go to g8 even, believe it or not. And if knight d6 check, just bishop d5 maybe, just blocking this diagonal. And if white wants to take there, sure, but he's still down material here, and will probably lose. So, and the king can probably also go here, or can he? Maybe not. Maybe this is a mistake because there's stuff like knight g5. So this is something that Svidler didn't count. He thought the king is safe here, and probably Carlsen thought as well. So maybe Carlsen should have tried this against Svidler and he could have won. Here maybe queen f5, but now bishop e6, very handy move. It looks like the queen is trapped. If queen takes e6, then there's queen g7 check, knight takes e6, and this is a lot better for white. So, and if queen takes g5, then queen takes g5, king takes e6, and this is also better for white, but it's not so clear. So perhaps white had a chance to trap black's queen there. Was queen f5 really necessary? Of course, queen g7 is coming. So what if something like just rook f... oh no, not rook f8. What if something silly like this? This queen g7 takes f6 and takes the bishop as well. Okay, so that's definitely something that black should try to prevent, but there's really no way to prevent that. What happens after king d6? Knight takes f3, so this bishop is at least lost. Very interesting. I think Carlsen was definitely onto something, and if Svidler would have played king e7 here, he would have probably lost instead of king g8, which is very counterintuitive because there's this hell machine going on where it can hit everything. So instead of these complications, white just played queen e3, which is probably the best move, objectively speaking, from computer to computer. And now black played bishop b7. So now there's these threats on this diagonal. Bishop f4, h4 here by white, and white is already in big time trouble. He's still able to make good moves. Queen h3, f3 pretty much forced, and now knight f4, really nice move, threatening mate again. So here probably best is just queen f2, but Carlsen played queen g takes f4. He was in time trouble, and Svidler did very well to find these difficult moves that you just need time to digest. Queen took the bishop, and now white saves his knight, and bishop takes f3 here. Very interesting move. If queen takes f3, then this rook is hanging. So taking advantage of the fact that this queen is kind of pinned to this rook, it has to babysit that rook, so it can't protect anything else. So very, very haughty move. Bishop takes f3, queen f2, queen g4 check, torturing Carlsen, not taking the queen exchange, but wanting something even more, because at this point Carlsen had like I don't know, 10 seconds left or something. Queen g4, queen g3, e takes, rook takes, and it's looking really bad for white here. Now he had like 4 seconds left and he still had to make 2 moves, so knight g5 doesn't make things any better because it just gives a tempo for black. And yeah, now we reached time control, but it's lost for white. Knight h6. Black just uses these bishops to roll them down the board, and this knight is almost trapped. This bishop can't do much, it's babysitting the knight at the moment. This knight doesn't have any time to get into the game. It's dominated by this bishop, and these pawns are rolling forward. White doesn't even care about this bishop here. If white takes this bishop now, then there's g3, and look at these pawns. One of them is gonna queen. So that's why white takes here. Now white takes this bishop, and there's g3, king e1, g2, king f2, and the killer move, bishop h2, giving up this f3 pawn. And this is where Carlsen resigned. He probably understood earlier already that he's lost, but he wanted to check the Ivanchuk-Kramnik game and how they're doing, and once he was kind of certain that Ivanchuk is gonna win, then he felt more safe to resign this game. So definitely a tournament of psychology, and I learned a lot from Ivanchuk, who at worst is like this little kid who just annoys the opponent and walks around behind your back, and while you're trying to make your move, and then as soon as you make a move, he steps back to the table and make his move, and these psychological tricks that just get to you no matter how good you are. These things just get to you, and if you're nervous, like Carlsen got nervous very many times, you can't perform well. You make blunders, you even get to time trouble, you play for the wrong result or something like that, and your judgment just gets totally clouded, and you might play like a 2400 or I don't know 2000 player, even though you're really like 2800. And on the other hand, if you're really confident, you get that edge. Like, I think Ivanchuk is maybe one of the most talented players in the world. When he gets that edge, it's like nothing can stop him. Then he's probably the best player in the world.